Hi, I'm Lisa, the artist behind Lachri Fine Art. It is Tuesday, so I'm here to critique one of your original paintings or drawings. If you have an original painting or drawing that you would like to submit for critique, head over to my website, lachri.com/critiques. That link is below in the video description, and you can submit your work there. There is a very long waiting list, so if you would like your artwork critiqued anytime sooner than like the next 2 or 3 years, you may want to head over to either our Facebook or Google Plus pages where there are other artists you can ask advice from. And I will have links to both of those in the video description. This week's submission comes from artist John. He has drawn this self-portrait in graphite. I almost said self-portrait of himself, but I guess that's kind of redundant. John has been a comic book illustrator his whole life and just now decided to try something realistic. This was his first attempt at a realistic portrait. This is awesome, and I can definitely see your comic book influence on this style, and while that may not have been your goal, I have to say I really like that look, where you do have portions that feel very comic booky and portions that feel more realistic. It's kind of a cool combination. Taking a look at a few things we can adjust to improve on this even more. First, being that your goal is realism, we want to start with a more solid foundation of the drawing. Spend more time making sure that that's very accurate. With comics, you can kind of get away with being more loose and having more stiff, straight lines. With portraits, every little curve, every little line makes a big difference when you're working in realism. So if we look at this area by the eye, you've got where it curves out on your reference photo, but you've kind of chopped off part of that. And what happens is now that area is thrown off. So the distance between the edge of the eye and the edge of the face has to be moved in, which adjusts where the eye is located on the face. Because you had to adjust where the eye is located, you have to counter that by where the nose is located and the other eye. One little thing being off will throw off everything else. Your entire balance usually will end up being fairly far off just because of that one little thing. So now you've done a great job because I can tell this is you. I can tell that this is from this photo, but you do want to make sure when you are working in realism, spend more time to make sure that foundation drawing is exactly right. Like I said, one thing off in a drawing tends to lead to lots of things off in a drawing. And at this point, I can tell you have great drawing skills. That's not the problem here. The problem is going to be in shifting your brain from looking at things in a comic book style into realism. It's a very different way that you view things. One thing you can do that will really help is to flip your reference photo and your drawing upside down. Work upside down. You're going to notice so many more details and so much more of those little things that I'm talking about, like the eye, the way it curves on the side of the face here. That sort of thing you're going to notice that you probably wouldn't have easily noticed on its own. And like I said, a lot of this is just going to be shifting your brain, teaching your brain to view things in a different way. And being that you have spent so many years working in a comic book style, it may be a little bit more of a challenge for you. That doesn't mean that it can't be done. It just means it's something that you want to be aware of. And working upside down for you especially, I think will really, really help, because right now your brain says, this is how I draw eyes. This is how I draw noses. This is how a nose should, this is how those things should look. So when you flip them upside down, when you flip that drawing upside down, your reference photo upside down, suddenly your brain's like, oh, these are just shapes. I don't see an eye so much anymore. I don't see a nose. I just see shapes, and now you can copy more accurately what you see in that reference photo. Now the next thing I want to look at is the shading. You can go a lot darker than what you've got comparing your work with your reference photo, but largely here my first tip would be use a reference photo that was not taken with a flash or with artificial lighting. You're losing all of the depth. Your reference photo alone, you can't see where the shading should be, and because you're just getting started with portraits, you want to make sure you're using a high quality reference photo that has really good lighting. Now you will hit a point where you've done so many realistic portraits where you're not as dependent on the high quality photo of the perfect lighting, perfect everything. But right now, while you're learning, ideally work from a photo. Even if you did it as a selfie, you could go do that outside in natural lighting, not in direct sunlight generally, that'll usually be too much. But if you can work from a photo with better lighting, you're going to be able to see where the contours of the face are much more, where your shadows should be, all of the things that are going to make the portrait look more three-dimensional and less cartoony. A lot of that comes when you're learning. You need that quality reference photo. As you can see from the reference photo here, it is almost solid white. It is very washed out, and there are areas you could go darker on yours, but even if you went as dark as it is there, this photo is so washed out that you really can't easily see where those shadows should go. My last tip is on the outlines you're using. Like, you've outlined the nose, you've outlined certain things, and well, at the same time, it's hard for me to give this advice because I actually really like what your end result was here. I love it. Feels very stylized, but being that your goal is realism, Remember, cartoons have outlines, people have shadows and highlights. We don't have definite outlines unless we've got a really strong shadow on one side. The actual lining though, that is something that you want to start avoiding, and what you'll do to make up for that, and part of this again goes back to not having a reference photo that has really good lighting, but you would shade part of the face. So the side of the nose where you've got that definite line, instead of that definite line, you would have a darker shadow on the cheek area and then the nose be lighter, and that's what's going to help separate those two. You don't want to depend on lines to separate planes like that. Not when working in realism anyway. Also, really watch the ears. Make sure that you're shading all of the details in there. Your reference photos, you can actually see a lot more with the shadows within the ears, and you've kind of just outlined them. There's not much shading going on there. Make sure when you're drawing portraits, everybody, when you're drawing portraits, those ears matter. Make sure you get the shadows, the values, everything in there just right. But you've done a really good job, especially given that this is your first time attempting a portrait in realism. Nice work. Hey! Have you subscribed? If not, I have a handy button right there. It's orange, has an orange arrow going to, no, it's not orange. It's actually round and has an orange arrow going to it. Words, they're hard. If you click on that, it'll help you to keep up to date with all 5 of my new art videos every single week. I'll see you guys tomorrow.